Hello, everybody. It's Max with Crypto Talk Now. I personally love the idea of hearing these particular interviews with the likes of Gilbert Verdian, CEO of Quant, explaining his particular experience in the past. For instance, creating the ISO standard in 2014, or even particularly some of these other types of experience he's had in regards to a topic of TCH, the clearinghouse. So without further ado, let's take a more of a deep dive into some particular research that we have here at Crypto Talk Now in regards to the likes of Quant. So let's jump right into this. And of course, shout out to the one, the only Quant Papa, who provides such great clips. And like you see right here, it says 14,000 banks. What does this entail? What's this all about? So, we're going to take a moment to basically listen to this. If anything, I have some research I would love to present to you guys because it's good to see where the world was going a few years ago and where Quant basically is right now as we speak. And if anything, for me, I'm just even that much more bullish on Quant. So let's take a moment to get into this. I'm going to go ahead and full screen it, come back here shortly, and then if anything, we'll have some additional commentary, and of course we have some additional clips to give you guys here today. Here we go.
What that means is when you're sending a transaction between you and someone else through your banks, it's in real time. The US has only just received that in the last couple of years. TCH was the first one, so I worked on that project through VocalLink in my previous role. That's to connect 14,000 banks to the TCH system, and even more recently, the Fed in the US is becoming a service provider with FedNow, so they're looking at providing real-time settlement between different banks and parties as well. And what that means is...
So let's briefly talk about just that. He mentioned, for instance, specifically TCH. And for instance, in my particular research, I came back to the payment site and so on. And I said to myself, there's a saying that happens in crypto. You probably heard it yourself. And basically, it goes like this. When in doubt, zoom out. Well, in this case, reflect back a few years ago based on history and then, see some of the proposals that were made or some of the things were worked on and fast forward to present day. So this particular article came back from August 10th of 2020. And while you may be thinking, wow, that's a pretty old article, it makes perfect sense to have an idea of what we accomplished and where we're at right now. So it says a clearinghouse on the race for real-time payments in the U.S. And I get it. The U.S. is basically going to be one of the last to show up to the big show when it comes to ISO 222. But if anything, let's take a moment to see some of the things that are posted here. So for one, like it says right here, it says real-time is getting ever closer to prime time, but it might not be the Federal Reserve's doing. You'd be forgiven to thinking, that faster payments might be the purview of the U.S. Federal Reserve, where the details of a roadmap of FedNow, the proposed instant payment system, were released earlier this month, but with a 2023-2024 timeframe for implementation. Now, just pause for just a moment. As you guys know, especially if you've been watching CTN for a while now, or even if you haven't, you've been fully aware of the delay, for instance. The delay, for instance, when it comes to the likes of ISO 222 into March of 2023. And like it says right here, it says the time frame to implementation. The Fed's efforts will take a while to cross the Rubicon from concept to reality. We already have that going on as we speak. Listen to these particular statements. Waiting for the Fed and its promise of interoperability. Immediately I'm thinking of Quant, which requires participation from the private sector. Is aching to playing the very long game. You see that as we currently speak, and we will continue to see it here within 2023, going all the way up to 2025. All right. On top of that, it says, in the meantime, as Russ Waterhouse, Executive Vice President of Product Development and Strategy at the Clearinghouse, told Karen Webster, there are plenty of initiatives and use cases being embraced right now here and to move the needle on speeding payments towards real-time ubiquity, away from paper checks and even from ACH payments that take 1 to 3 days or more to settle and post. You think about the whole concept of what we have already going on with the likes of, for instance, XRP, XLM, so on and so forth, right? We don't want to live in the old system of, you know, a society in which things take too long. Or heck, how about this? Western Union, right? Sending a payment to somebody who's in the middle of, for instance, the Congo, like a missionary or somebody like that, and it takes 2 weeks for them to accept payment or receive payment. We live in what is referred to as the now society. Excuse me, I keep clearing my throat if you hear that clicking back and forth. Anyway, so yes, with that said, living in this particular now society. Now check this out for yourself. When I go further into this, it mentions specifically about the real-time payments. It says, along with what card networks and fintechs are doing to enable real-time push payments to receiver bank accounts. Part of the tailwind comes from the fact that consumers are becoming more aware that there's a better mousetrap out there. Waterhouse said that the recent and various challenges of getting, economic impact payments, which is EIP, into the hands of those who need it most, spotlight the need for seamless, real-time delivery of and access to funds. Literally, we are now approaching that particular era, and it's going to happen sooner than people think. And for these particular use cases, when it comes to the likes of Quant, Ripple's XRP, Stellar Lumens, so on and so forth. It says, as has been widely reported, millions of Americans had to wait weeks and months for paper checks to arrive. In other cases, stimulus payments were commingled with tax refunds and were subject to garnishment. Now let's take a pause to reflect on that in itself. So for instance, like here at CTM, we mentioned, for instance, and let's face it, we cover, XDC quite a bit as well. And with XDC, for instance, you have, a very fast transactions per second. It's 2,000 last I checked. And if anything, that is also one of those ISO 222 compliant ones that you can add to the list. But of course, at the start of when this all gets implemented, let's face it, the flip of the switch, the ones that definitely stand out are the likes of XRP and the likes of Stellar Lumens. Now, where Quant comes into the mix is it's kind of like, what you see with Gilbert's background. He created the ISO standard back in 2014. And what he's basically getting going continuously, I should say, from years ago into present, right? Literally thousands of banks and so on. So how about this for measure, right? So, God forbid that we get into another, for instance, another pandemic. Nobody wants to hear that, right? But like you've seen outlined here, for instance, think about how long it was for people here, especially the United States, right, to receive, stimulus payments and so on, right? Some of them, for instance, I think it was like my spouse at the time, or I should say my girlfriend, technically speaking, she didn't receive her particular stimulus payment until the end of the year, while everybody else received at the beginning of the year. And while she's like, a hardworking, tax-paying citizen, like a lot of us and so on, it just didn't seem right to have to wait that long, And of course, there's the whole debate of, well, it's just based on, A to Z. And, if you're one of the people that are in this particular section, let's say, your last name's Allen or something like that, you may receive it first. While it's just a theory, right? It makes you wonder when you receive it last. Well, if there was a new system, that's kind of like what we have right now, where you get the real-time payments and everything is just kind of like almost instantaneous for everybody, it alleviates or eliminates, I should say, a lot of the problem. You see basically what was outlined here. Getting a little bit more further into this, it mentions, for instance, I'm going to skip further down. Says learning from past mistakes will be important. They're saying that we're roughly 120 million ACH, 36 million checks, and about 4 million debit cards issued in the first funding round. Indeed, a webinar focused on FedNow, Federal Reserve Governor Lyle Brainard, acknowledged the stimulus payments, like I was mentioning, and the lack of liquidity experienced by some recipients as proof positive that delivering fast payments is becoming ever more critical. They recognized back in 2020 how critical it was. When we go further down into this, you'll see how, for instance, the emerging trend, like it basically mentions right here, was to get to where we are currently speaking. It's the likes of Quant and some of the other ones of the ISOs, right? So on this particular section, it says Waterhouse said that in terms of the clearinghouse's own initiatives in getting banks on board, the ongoing effort to make RTP ubiquitous, I'm not even pronouncing that right, so I apologize, across the entirety of the U.S. financial services ecosystem, traction may have thus far been slower than originally thought. Achieving ubiquity across the 12,000 or so financial institutions in the U.S. is actually a two-step process. Now, again, let's just pause and think about that. With what we got going on, and especially with, let's face it, I mean, not necessarily here in the United States, but what they have going on in, for instance, Europe, with the implementation here soon of CBDCs, it takes out one of those steps. And if anything, right, we live in this real-time now society, generation now, right? But look at this particular part. It says connecting the core banking systems of these FIs, right, financial institutions, to the TCH, the clearinghouse network, and then getting the banks to make it a part of their service offering. It says, but change is afoot as a growing number of stakeholders in the financial services arena are embracing, this is the key part I want you guys to pay attention to, are embracing and offering real-time payments. And think about, again, what's going on as we speak, going from these concepts or ideas basically 3 years ago and what we're at now with ISO 222 and some of the other developments and so on, right? So it says, in the midst of the pandemic, Waterhouse said of TCH's own RTP network, quote, we are seeing significant signs of a very different trend. And think about the push to get to that trend and some of the ideas and implementations that have now come full circle. Immediately, again, thinking of Quant at the top of the list, because if anything, right, Quant's own Gilbert Verdian is basically like the architect of how this all came about. So it says, against that backdrop, while the first year and a half of TCH's RTP push saw uptake by larger member banks, something that Waterhouse said may have fed a misperception of the TCH focus to connect just, quote, the big guys, the clearinghouse always knew the key to ubiquity was getting, quote, the longer tail on board and has worked hard from the outset to achieve that goal. And we basically have achieved that goal. We're basically about to implement some of these ideas and some of these proposals to be fully implemented here within the next few months. And then again, guys, when it comes to this flip of the switch, it's going to be a process in itself, but you will start seeing how the adoption kicks in after that. I think March of 2023 is going to be massive. I'm going to skip further down here. This specific part right here, where it basically mentions, in addition, FIS has brought its first bank onto the platform. Again, this is back in 2020. And shortly 400 banks will have access to real-time payments, with the combined exposure through JHA, FIS, Corporate One Credit Union, and others. Waterhouse estimated that RTP will reach 70% of the financial services market before the end of the year. Think about this on scale, for instance, what Quant is accomplishing, right? So I understand that messaging standards and real-time payments is a different story. But the connection is what? The connection is what Quant brought to the table and is still bringing to the table as we speak. Now, touching on this right here before we kick it in more into today's particular Quant coverage, expanding the use cases. Listen to this. It says Waterhouse said that getting banks to sign on is about showing them the relevant use cases that will drive revenue and even new customer acquisition. So this period of time that we went through between, for instance, let's face it, during the 2020 pandemic and so on up until present, was again showing the relevant use cases and how that's tied, for instance, to blockchain and how that's tied into, Ripple, tied into Stellar and what they bring to the table for the real-time payments. And on top of that, the on-demand liquidity, the peer-to-peer payments, for instance, like a Stellar and so on. But again, you think about, for instance, Gilbert Verdian's experience, what he brings to the table, and if anything, what he's able to accomplish with the likes of Quant and so on is just on a different scale that's just completely beyond anything that we've ever seen before. So on top of that, it mentions what's going to change that are some new use cases. He pointed to Paychecks, which provides HR solutions as an example, where in June, the firm said it had sent $4.6 million in real-time payments for payroll in just 2 weeks after making that feature available. Waterhouse said an inevitable shift away from ACH reflects the benefits of RTP, which is real-time payments. Employers can know instantly with, say, Friday payroll. This is a good example. If there have been glitches, and address them before even the employees spot the issue. Again, there's so much. What's being accomplished here? What's being accomplished is transparency that has never been done before. And if anything, it's at a scale that, again, eliminates a lot of the problems that exist currently in the financial sector of the world. I'm going to skip further down here, and I like this as well. It mentions to get a sense of how sticky that loyalty can be, for instance, when it comes to banks that offer real-time payroll, the desire to capture direct deposits, right? Because that is a problem. It says to get a sense of how sticky that loyalty can be, Waterhouse noted that, for instance, Grubhub, a lot of you guys use that, which he said is a larger user of real-time payments, has actually been steering its drivers towards banks that offer the real-time service and away from financial institutions that don't, and thus take advantage of daily payout options. For me personally, I'll just be honest, this puts a lot of demand and pressure on banks to basically implement a lot of these quote-unquote real-time payments and develop or partner with those particular companies and businesses that are going to be providing real-time solutions. Again, kind of like what you see with, where this Ripple's XRP, so on and so forth. They need to have these particular technology. And again, it's all about supply and demand and so on, but this creates even that much more demand for the likes of these particular ISO 222 client tokens, coins, and so on. All right, going towards the bottom, it says what's next, right? Because in reflection on where we're at currently speaking. Is looking ahead, Waterhouse said that by the end of the year, RTP may see as many as 300 or 400 non-clearinghouse member banks offering real-time payments functionality and the results of a proof of concept for bill payments that Waterhouse said could drive explosive growth. This pilot program uses routed requests for payment using a Zelle social alias for traditional account information to make bill payments. Sent, settled, posted, and confirmed in real time. Waterhouse also said that as these new use cases continue to gain use, there will be more and more that appear that haven't even thought of, but innovative fintechs and financial institutions will. And of course, there's this particular last statement. It's going to be extremely compelling and competitively disconcerting for banks that don't have access to RTP, real-time payments. So again, when it comes to the whole, for instance, the mandate, right? Think about how important the mandate is of ISO 222. If you don't have certain banks that are on that, it's going to be, I hate to use this expression, but the death of certain types of banks. And if they don't hop on this, especially the ones here in the US, by, for instance, the scope of 2025, there's going to be no reason to have any of these people, especially the ones with Uber, Grubhub, and so on, wanting to stay around. And again, for somebody like ourselves, that makes us that much more bullish on these particular technologies because we hold the particular ones that we're invested in and so on. So there's a little bit more in regards to this, and that is this as well that you're about to see right here. It says, for instance, the next financial system. This is about a minute and a half in regards to this particular interview from Gilbert Verdian. I'm going to full screen this, and then we'll come right back with some post commentary here shortly.
Is the start of what we're doing. The vision that we have is to, create the next financial system that is a hybrid between traditional finance and all the networks and the systems and decentralized finance. And I have mentioned in the past, enterprise will not decentralize. They can't from a regulation perspective, they can't from a security risk perspective, they just can't do it from all the governance and the compliance they have. Mm-hmm. But they want to decentralize in a controlled way. And, we're that way to do it. If you think about how we've architected Overledger, you get the best of both worlds. You can keep your traditional secure financial system, and then you can actually connect it to a decentralized blockchain. And I've heard people say, our technology is patented and it's not decentralized, it's a cloud. They really don't understand architecture and technology in depth. What we're doing is we're bringing in hyper decentralization. We're bringing in a way where enterprise can actually decentralize to 10 blockchains today at scale. This is not just decentralization, it's hyper decentralization. So they're doing it from a way where it's more comfortable and more accepted from their perspective. And so our vision is to be the foundation of, there's a term DeFi, whatever.
Yeah, I heard that.
We just call it the next financial system. We're re-architecting this.
I like how that's outlined right there. The next Quant's creating the next financial system. Shout out to Daniel Gayton, who was on the live show, who mentioned this before. I don't know if it was right during the live show, but when I was basically talking to him briefly, I think actually at the post show, he looks at Quant basically like this, right? Like Microsoft Windows, for instance. And if you think about look at, for instance, all the apps on the App Store, if you will, that require just that Microsoft, Windows, for instance. Quant makes everything interoperable, and they do it at such a massive scale. Like, for instance, what Gilbert mentioned, 10 blockchains, right, at scale that nobody else has basically done. And then guess what? Basically that list keeps adding and adding up, to say the least. There's this right here. I'm going to show you guys this for just a brief moment. And if anything, we'll come back for some closing commentary for today's particular Quant coverage. All right, here we go.
I've heard people say, our technology is patented and it's not decentralized, it's a cloud. They really don't understand architecture and technology in depth. What we're doing is we're bringing in hyper decentralization. We're bringing in a way where enterprise can actually decentralize to 10 blockchains today at scale. This is not just decentralization, it's hyper decentralization. I've heard.
All right, I'm just going to come back in. I believe I already just played that particular one, but that's okay. So I want to show you guys just real quick, and that is, for instance, in regards to the Quant price, we're sitting at 129.11. Quant is now in the top 3, kind of been hovering, or top 3, I wish. It's in the top 30. It's been kind of hovering around in that particular area at 129.18. Again, it has a very, appealing circulating supply compared to the likes of Bitcoin at, a little over 12 million. Bitcoin, of course, has a more larger circulating supply, to say the least. And of course, like we mentioned before, the max supply and total supply is that much not, I should say, excuse me, that much more, not much more bigger, I should say. It's sitting at roughly around 14.6 million. It's almost equal to the total supply. So, there's so much going on in regards to Quant and what they're accomplishing. I mean, to have the likes of Gilbert Verdian basically mention some of the things that are outlined, what has been ongoing as we speak, 14,000 banks and so on. That particular example that we provided earlier, I think it was, if anything, about 400 or so back in 2020, and to see what we got going on now is tremendous. Another thing I also want to point out is this. Think about Bitcoin, for instance, right? A lot of people were able to own a full Bitcoin. Now, let's, for instance, mention the whole idea of people just owning like a fraction of it and so on. With Quant, I want to try to get as many of the actual full coins. I don't want to just have a fragmentation of it and so on. I think it's going to get to the point also that we're going to be priced out of Quant. I see that happening anywhere from, for instance, March of 2023 going into like say 2025, 2026, in that range, right? Because of the adoption of where we're going to be at with the new monetary system. So guys, thanks again for watching today's particular Quant coverage. Hopefully it gives you some insight of what has happened in the past and where we're currently at, where we're going in the future. Like, comment, subscribe if you haven't done so already. Please hit that bell notification to be informed about new videos as well as the live show. You all have a blessed day, and we'll see you on the next one.